Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video we are going to get an introduction to Git. We're going to talk about what it is and why we care, and we're going to get kind of a high-level overview of how it works. We're not going to really delve into the super deep part of Git in this video or in this course at all. The reason being that Git is a relatively complex piece of software that is a little bit confusing to a lot of people, and basically it's just outside the scope of this course. So as a disclaimer, this is a brief overview of Git. It's not an in-depth study. Git is a topic that could have an entire course dedicated to it, and we're just going to kind of get a high-level overview of it. We're going to learn what it is, and then we're going to learn how to use the parts that we need for this class. We're not really going to talk about the more in-depth aspects such as branching and merging and things like that, other than to get kind of a basic understanding of what they do. So first off, what is Git? Git is what's called version control software, or VCS. It was created by Linus Torvalds of Linux fame. He's the guy who created the Linux kernel. And it is used to simplify versioning in software development. And when we're talking about versioning, we're talking about all the different patches, all the different things. Like, for example, if you've got a piece of software and then later you might patch it up and to enable some bug fixes and maybe some new functionality, things like that. So those are the different versions of the software. Just like in our software, we had older versions that only had ugly pages and they didn't have all the functionality. They didn't have the user login functionality, for example. Those were older versions, and now we have the newer versions that do have those. So Git would have helped us create different versions for those and keep track of those. And once we add it, we're going to be able to start keeping track of everything. So why do we care? The number one reason that most developers use Git is that it allows you to work with others without stepping on each other. Just think about it this way. In the past, if you have worked with others on code, just think about the last time that you worked with other people on code. If you haven't, not a big deal. I'm sure you can still imagine this. How did you share your code? If you were each working on different parts of it, how did you share it? What I've found out with most students is that they end up emailing their code to each other. They write their code, they write the part that they need, they email it to the other person. That other person copies that code, pastes it into theirs, and then makes comments on it or makes changes to it, and then emails it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you end up having a lot of problems, either with one of you changing things that breaks the other person's thing, or maybe you had a problem with the copy-paste part where you missed part of it that they copied, or you overwrote some of the stuff you already did. So that's the problem. But Git allows you to overcome that. It lets you to create different branches, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what those are, and then merge them back together into kind of the master one. Git also creates basically a snapshot of every point of the development process so that you can undo to any point in that entire development process, depending on, like, oh crap, this feature isn't working out, so let's just go ahead and scrap it and go back to the way it was. Or something like, hey, remember that thing that we got rid of months ago? Well, we kind of want it back now. Well, you can go back and get that, copy it, and then move back forward and put it into the new one. So it takes snapshots in the development of your software. It's also used by GitHub to back up your code, and it's used by Heroku to push your code to Heroku, and we'll talk about GitHub and Heroku later this week. So just a little bit of terminology to get us started. This is not a comprehensive list. There's a lot more terms associated with Git, but these are the ones that we care about. First off, you have a repository, or a repo, you'll hear it called most of the time. This is the entire collection of files that's associated with your project. This includes all the old files. The repo includes everything that has ever been put in there, even if you've deleted it, even if you've changed it, it keeps all of the old copies. That is what a repo does. It keeps everything. Master is the default name of the main version in our repo, and we'll talk about different versions and what the naming of that is and how you create those, so on and so forth. But master, whenever you say master, we're talking about the main version. A commit is a collection of files, a message about how you got to those files, and all of the commits that came before it. This is where the snapshot comes in. A commit is like a snapshot. It's a moment frozen in time that you can refer back to later, and it includes everything that came before it. A commit is your collection of local files, some sort of a message about what you did, the changes that you made since the last commit, as well as all the commits that came before it. And a branch, this is something that it's important for you to understand on a conceptual level, but we're not actually going to implement in this class. A branch is an independent line of development, often running concurrent to the master, that could be merged back in later. Think about this like you're adding a feature, is oftentimes what you do with branches. You'll say, okay, I've got my main app. Let's say I've got my Yelp Comics app, and then I want to add the feature about having each user can build a library of the things that they've read or want to read. I might create a branch that includes that library, and that branch will be different from the master branch because the master branch doesn't have that feature yet. I'm still developing master and doing bug fixes and fixing the UI and all that kind of stuff, but I'm also developing this branch that has the little library into it, hoping that later on I can kind of merge it back into the master and add that feature later. The way that Git works is that it has basically 3 buckets, is how I kind of like to think of it. You've got your working directory bucket, your staging area bucket, and your head bucket. The working directory is the bucket that has all of the files, the local file sphere application, just how you see them. This is the folder, the directory, if you will, where you code. The staging area is the second bucket. It's basically a holding area where we're telling it, hey, I'm about to back up these files. Get ready to back these files up. These are the specific files that I want to back up. So it kind of points to things inside of the working directory. So it's a sub bucket, if you will, of things inside the working directory. And then head is a pointer that points to the last commit that you made. And I know none of this is probably making all that much sense later. Git is the kind of thing that you have to use to really understand it. So we're just trying to get a basic understanding of what it is, and then it's going to really start to coalesce and make a little bit more sense once you start to use it. So here's the basic workflow. First off, you have your working directory. You're going to code here like you always do. Nothing is special about that. Then you run git add, which adds whatever you choose, because you can add individual files, you can add everything. You can pick from the working directory what parts you want to add to the staging area. The staging area allows you to preview files that are going to be added to a commit. So you might include, let's say that you added a button to your landing page. Well, your landing page has now changed in your working directory from the last time you used it, so you might add it to the staging area. And now you can look at it and say, okay, what's different about this? So now that I've got this change, that index file that has the new button in it, I want to commit it. Now, right now, head is pointing to the previous commit, to the time before. So what's going to happen is that all the staging area files are going to be compared to the head files, and any changes will be committed, and then the head will move forward to the next commit. You also have the option of pushing it up to a remote repo. After you have committed it, you can push it up to a remote repo such as GitHub. That's the most popular one. And generally speaking, these are in the cloud. They don't have to be, but generally speaking, they are. Now let's briefly talk about Git Branch. As I said, we're not actually going to use this, but if you don't understand Git Branch and you go to get a development job, people are going to look at you like you're a little crazy. The way the Git branch works is you have, let's say we have this master branch right here. Each of these little circles is a different commit. So this commit might be, okay, I added the favorite route. This commit might be I added another route. This commit might be I added a button. Here I added a picture or whatever. I'm doing things. But let's say right here, I wanted to add a little feature where my users can upload a profile picture. So I might say, okay, between this one and this one right here, let's say I added user authentication, and this one right here, I just continued on with my plan as always, but I might want to add the feature so users can add their profile picture. So I'll make a branch, and this makes an entire copy of this whole thing and puts it up here. So now I can switch between these two. I can jump down to this one to do a bug fix, or I can jump back up to this one to work on my new feature. Now, and then once I get my feature done, we'll merge it back in, and that's on the next slide. So you might have a little feature that only has one little commit, and then you merge it back in, or you might have a big feature, such as the whole library functionality we talked about, that has a bunch of different commits while you're working on it. And notice that it's running concurrently. These things are running at the same time. So master is here, and your big feature down here with the library is here. So master can continue to have commits at the same time that the library can continue to have commits, and they don't affect each other. This is the important part. I'm working on this one. Let's say you're working on this one. That way we can both continue working separately on the same code base, but we're not stepping on each other because we're not messing with each other's code. Now the magic happens whenever you put it back in, whenever you merge them back together. So let's say we've got our master here, and then these are the new feature, the library feature. And this just shows 2 commits, but it could have a million if we wanted it to. So we split it off here, we branch it here, and then let's say you're working on the library and you're working and working, and you finally get it done and say, okay, the feature is done, let's release it. So you merge it back into the main, into the master, and what that does is that will show up and say, okay, here are the differences between master and the new feature version, let's compare them and make sure that everything merges back together and nothing breaks. So that's how the merge works. It allows you to break this code off into two separate branches that are separate from each other so that different people can be working on each branch. And then once it's ready, you merge them back together into the master branch. And like I said, we're not going to be doing this in this class. This is just something you need to understand conceptually how it works so that when you go to try and get a job or anything like that, you can speak intelligently about it. I highly recommend after you're done with this class or at some point in the future, you take some sort of a dive into Git. You can take a class on it, you can just read the docs, you can do a variety of different ways. But Git is very important for the vast majority of development jobs, so understanding how to use it and how to work with others with it is a wonderful skill that you should learn if you are going to get into any type of development, be it web development or console development or game development or business development, any type of development. They're all going to have some sort of version control system, and the vast majority of those are based on Git or are very similar to Git. So in summary, Git is version control software that we can use to manage multiple versions of our application. Git has 3 buckets. It's got the working directory, which is where our local files are. It has the staging area, which is where we're basically telling Git, hey, I'm about to back these up, prep these to be backed up. And then head, which is a pointer that points to the last commit. And then as soon as we commit it, it moves the head to the most recent commit. Git allows us to undo and redo changes throughout the history of our product. It also allows us to refer back to previous versions of our project in case we need to copy something that we deleted or whatever. Git allows us to create branches off of the master branch, which can then be merged back into that master branch at a later date or not. If you make a branch and you decide, you know what, we don't want to add this feature, you don't have to. You can just let it die. But you can, if you want to, merge it back into master later once it's ready. I know this video was a little bit kind of theoretical. We're going to get to actually using Git in the very next video. We're going to talk about 4 of the major commands that we're going to use and that make up the vast majority of all Git usage. We're not going to get into branching, but we are going to get into creating and adding and making commits and things like that. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to help. Thanks.